I should have left when she said it. "Pretend you're my husband tonight," my boss told me in a hotel hallway, barefoot, holding her heels in one hand like she suddenly didn't trust the floor. If stories about love, regret, and the nights that quietly change people stay with you, subscribe to VellichorEchoStory. These are the memories people usually only admit when it's too late to take them back. I laughed at first, not because it was funny, more because Mara Bennett was the kind of woman who never said anything without already knowing what it would cost. She didn't waste words. She definitely didn't joke when her mascara had smudged at the corners and the hand holding her room key was shaking hard enough to make the little paper sleeve rattle. When I realized she was serious, the hallway got very quiet. There was ice humming in a machine at the far end. Somebody's TV was bleeding canned laughter through a door. The carpet smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and old rain. Mara just stood there looking at me with this exhausted, almost angry kind of fear, like she hated that I was the person she had to ask. "Just for tonight," she said. I remember looking at her bare feet before I looked back at her face. Red painted toes, one ankle already going pink from the strap of the heel she'd kicked off. Ridiculous detail to remember, maybe, but that's what shock does. It saves the wrong things. "Why?" I asked. She glanced down the hall like she thought the answer might be standing there listening. "My mother is confused," she said. "My father's in surgery. My sister called me 20 minutes ago. My mother keeps asking where my husband is." I stared at her. She swallowed. "I don't have one anymore, and I can't explain my divorce to her again tonight." The part I don't say out loud very often is that if anyone else had asked me, I would have said no. If Seth from sales had come knocking on my door with some mess like that, I'd have handed him directions to the nearest urgent care and shut the door. But Mara wasn't anyone else. She'd been my boss for almost 11 months, which was long enough to know the rhythm of her footsteps outside a conference room, and short enough to still get tense when she stood behind me while I worked. She was 39, sharp without being showy, the kind of person people called intimidating when what they meant was she noticed too much. She remembered numbers no one else remembered. She caught lies in the half second before they were spoken. She drank bad hotel coffee like it had personally offended her. Most people at the firm thought she didn't like me. That wasn't completely unreasonable. She edited my reports harder than anybody's. She sent emails without exclamation points. She once stared at a presentation I'd spent 12 hours fixing and said, "This is almost honest. Try again." Still, she also knew I took my coffee black after noon because cream made it taste like dessert. She remembered my sister's name after meeting her once at a company picnic. And one January, when I came into work 2 days after my mother's funeral because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, Mara set a paper bag on my desk with a turkey sandwich inside and never mentioned it again. People mistake restraint for coldness all the time. That week we were in Cleveland for a healthcare client pitch, 3 days of smiling through fluorescent conference rooms and pretending delayed flights hadn't turned all of us into meaner versions of ourselves. It had rained the whole trip. Not dramatic movie rain, just the steady, stubborn kind that made parking lots shine and cuffs of slacks stay damp. Mara had been off since we landed. She kept checking her phone and then turning it face down. She skipped the second round of drinks at dinner, which for her wasn't unusual, but she also stopped listening in the middle of a client story and stared out the restaurant window so long our VP had to repeat her name twice. When Seth made some harmless joke about whoever's waiting at home putting up with her schedule, Mara smiled without her eyes and changed the subject so cleanly it made the whole table uncomfortable. I noticed because I always noticed her more than I should have. That was my own problem. I was 35, old enough to know better than to get attached to people who sign my performance reviews. Old enough to know admiration can put on cleaner clothes and start calling itself something else. I had a whole graveyard of bad timing behind me already. An engagement that ended with 2 mugs breaking in a sink. A mother I kept thinking I had one more phone call with. A habit of showing up late to the most important emotional moments of my own life, then spending years trying to make up for them in situations that didn't belong to me. So when Mara asked me to be her husband for one night, the smart part of me understood exactly how dangerous that sentence was. The other part had already grabbed my car keys. We were in the elevator less than 5 minutes later. She changed out of the black heels and into white hotel slippers that made her look strangely younger, almost unfinished. She hugged her elbows while we dropped 12 floors in silence. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Akron General," she said. "You grew up in Akron?" "Close enough." The elevator doors opened into the lobby. Rain smeared the glass entrance. The valet looked half asleep. Mara stopped walking long enough to tuck a strand of damp hair behind her ear, then said very quietly, "You can still say no." I should have. That's the truth. Instead, I said, "Do I get a fake name, or am I just me with worse judgment?" She looked at me then, and for the first time that night, something loosened in her face. "For a fake husband," she said, "you're not very reassuring." "That's not my department." The smallest sound came out of her, not quite a laugh, more like a crack in the wall where one could happen later. Outside, the cold hit us at once. I ran to get the car and brought it around while she waited under the awning, hugging herself. When she slid into the passenger seat, she smelled like rain, hotel soap, and the citrus perfume she wore so lightly I only ever caught it when she passed too close. I pulled out onto the road. Wipers thumped back and forth. Downtown lights blurred gold in the windshield. For the first 10 minutes, neither of us said much. Then, somewhere near the highway, she asked, "Are you angry?" "At what?" "That I asked." I kept my eyes on the road. "I haven't figured it out yet." That got a real laugh. Brief, tired, gone too fast. "My mother has memory issues," she said after a while. "Nothing formal enough to make it easier. Just, some days she loses the order of things. Since chemo last year, stress makes it worse. She keeps reaching for old versions of people because they're easier to hold on to." I nodded. "She still thinks I'm married sometimes," Mara went on. "Usually I correct her. Tonight my sister said she's scared and asking for me, and if I walk in there alone, I'm going to have to watch her understand all over again that my marriage ended. My father is in surgery, and her body keeps forgetting how to protect her from bad news." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. "I know how selfish that sounds." "It doesn't sound selfish. It sounds pathetic then." "No," I glanced at her. "It sounds like you don't want your mother breaking twice in one night." She turned toward the window after that, not because she was done talking, more because sometimes when someone gets too close to the truth, you need glass between you and their face. We drove another 15 minutes through rain and truck spray and dark stretches of road lined with wet trees. At one red light, her phone lit up with a name I didn't know. She silenced it without reading the message. "Your sister?" I asked. She hesitated. "No." That was all she said. At a gas station outside the hospital district, I stopped to fill up because the tank was lower than I thought. Mara stayed in the car at first, head tipped back against the seat, eyes closed. Under the hard fluorescent canopy, she looked suddenly less like my boss and more like a woman who had been holding herself together with posture alone. I bought coffee neither of us wanted, a bottle of water, and one of those little packets of peanut butter crackers people only eat in emergencies and childhoods. When I got back, she blinked at the crackers like they had personally insulted her. "You think this is comfort food?" "I think it's 11:30.
I should have left when she said
since
it.
lunch." "Pretend you're my husband
them
tonight,"
anyway.
my boss
Our
told me
fingers
at a
brushed
hotel
for a
hallway,
second,
barefoot,
dry
holding her
despite
heels
the
in one
cold.
hand like she suddenly
It was such a
didn't trust
small
the
thing.
floor. But she
If
looked stories about
and I
love,
looked back,
regret, and
the
something in
nights
that
that quietly
pause felt
changed
more
people's
intimate
with
than it
you.
had any right to.
Subscribe
to VellichorEchoStory,
you.
she said. "These are the memories
shrugged
people
like it
usually
didn't
only
matter.
admit when it's
It
too late
mattered.
to take them back."
Of course it did.
I laughed at first.
At the hospital,
not because it
everything
was
turned
funny,
that awful shade of
more because
overnight.
Mara Bennett was
Too
the
bright
kind of
in the
woman who
ceilings,
never said
too
anything
tired in the
without already
chairs,
knowing what it
too
would cost.
honest on people's faces.
She didn't waste words.
A vending machine buzzed
She definitely
by the
didn't
waiting
joke
area.
when her mascara
The coffee
had
smelled
smudged
burnt
at the
enough to
corners,
peel paint.
and the hand holding her
Somewhere
room key
down the
was shaking
corridor,
hard
a
enough
baby
to make the
cried
little
once
paper
and
sleeve
stopped.
rattle.
Mara slowed.
I realized she was
reached
serious.
the family waiting room.
The hallway got very quiet.
You don't have to say much. There was ice humming in a machine.
If my mother
at the far
asks,
end, just be kind.
Somebody's TV
My sister
was
knows
bleeding
the truth.
canned laughter.
She
through
won't
a
make
door.
this worse. The carpet smelled
And your
faintly like
father?
lemon cleaner and old
She gave me a
rain.
look
Mara
that should
just
have
stood
answered
there
the
looking
question,
at me with this
but didn't.
exhausted,
My
almost
father
angry
doesn't really
kind of
make
fear.
room for truths he
Like she
didn't
hated
approve
that I was
of.
the person she had
That
to
was the
ask.
first moment I
Just for
understood
tonight,
I wasn't walking
she
into
said.
a simple lie.
I remember looking at
I was
her bare
walking
feet
into a
before I
house
looked
fire
back
with
at
a
her
paper
face.
cup of water.
Red painted toes.
June recognized Mara
One
before
ankle
we got
already
all the
going
way
pink
into the
from
room.
the strap of the heel.
She
she'd
stood up
kicked
so
off.
fast her blanket
Ridiculous
slid off her
detail
knees.
to remember, maybe.
She was younger,
But that's what
softer
shock
around the
does.
edges.
It saves
But I could
the
see
wrong
the family
things.
resemblance in the eyes.
Why? I
The
asked.
same careful way of
She
looking
glanced
at
down the
people,
hall like she thought
they
the
might
answer might
bruise
be
if
standing
handled
there
wrong.
listening. Mare.
My mother is
she breathed.
confused, she said.
They hugged hard.
My father's
not
in
graceful.
surgery.
Real.
My sister called me 20
Then
minutes ago.
June looked over Mara's
My
shoulder
mother keeps
at me,
asking where
took
my
in my
husband
face,
is. The awkward
stared at
distance
her.
I was keeping.
She swallowed.
And understood everything in
I don't
about
have
2
one
seconds.
anymore.
And
This
I
is
can't
Eli,
explain my divorce to
Mara
her
said.
again tonight. And there was the tiniest break
The part
in her
I don't
voice
say out
before
loud
she
very
added,
often is that if anyone
came
else
with
had
me.
asked me, I would
June
have
held
said
my
no.
gaze
If
for
Seth
half a
from
beat.
sales had come
Then she
knocking
walked
on
over
my
and
door
hugged
with
me
some
too.
mess like that,
Thank you.
I'd have handed him
She
directions
whispered
to the
into my
nearest
shoulder.
urgent care and shut
That
the
did
door.
something to my chest I wasn't
But Mara
prepared
wasn't
for.
anyone else.
Their mother was sitting by the
She'd
far
been my
wall
boss
with
for
a
almost
cardigan
11
wrapped
months,
around her like it was
which was
a
long
coat.
enough to know the rhythm
Small
of her
woman,
footsteps
thin
outside
wrists.
a conference room.
The kind of
and
tired
short
enough to
elegance
still
some
get
mothers
tense
keep
when she
even in
stood
hospital
behind me
waiting
while I
rooms.
worked.
She
She
looked
was
up when
39,
Mara approached, and
sharp
for a second,
without being showy.
The fear in her
The kind of
face was
person
so
people
naked
called
I had to look
intimidating,
away.
when what they
Then
meant
she
was
saw
she
me.
noticed too much.
Oh, she said.
She remembered numbers
And
no
relief
one else
softened
remembered.
her entire body.
She caught lies
There
in the
you
half
are.
second before they were
Mara
spoken.
knelt in front of her.
She drank
Hi,
bad
Mom.
hotel coffee.
Carol
like it had
touched her
personally
daughter's
offended
cheek,
her. Then reached
Most
for my
people
hand
at the
without
firm
really
thought she
asking.
didn't like me.
Her palm
That
was
wasn't
cool,
completely unreasonable.
fragile almost.
She edited my
I let her
reports
hold
harder
on.
than anybody's.
I told
She sent
June you
emails
wouldn't come
without
alone,
exclamation
she said
points.
to Mara.
She once
I
stared
said
at
her
her
husband would bring
presentation
you.
I'd spent 12 hours
Mara's
fixing
eyes
and
flickered
said,
shut.
"This
Just
is
once.
almost honest. Try
Yeah,
again," she
Still,
said quietly.
she also knew
He
I took
did.
my coffee black after
Nobody in that
noon
room
because
breathed
cream
for a
made it
second.
taste like dessert.
I said something.
She
then.
remembered my sister's
I don't
name
even
after
remember
meeting
what.
her once at a company
Probably
picnic.
hello.
And
Probably
one
something
January,
gentle and useless.
when I came into
But
work
Carol
2 days
smiled
after
at
my
me like
mother's
I was a
funeral
piece of
because I didn't know
furniture
what else to
returning
do
to a
with my
familiar
hands.
corner.
Mara set a
And I
paper
understood
bag
what
on my
old
desk
memory
with a
can
turkey
do when
sandwich
it's scared.
inside, and
It
never
doesn't
mentioned
check
it again.
facts.
People mistake
reaches.
restraint for coldness all the
An
time.
hour later, around
that
1
week
in the
we were in
morning,
Cleveland for a healthcare
I met the man
client
Mara
pitch.
had silenced
3 days
on
of
her phone.
smiling through fluorescent
His name was
conference rooms
Sam.
and pretending delayed
He
flights
came in
hadn't
carrying
turned
a
all of us
rain-soaked
into meaner
coat
versions of
and a
ourselves.
paper bag from a
It had
24-hour
rained the whole
diner.
trip.
Not
It was
dramatic
tall,
movie rain.
tired looking,
Just the steady,
decent
stubborn
face,
kind that made parking
not
lots
slick,
shine and cuffs of
not a
slack
villain.
stay damp.
That almost
Mara
would
had
have
been
been
off
easier.
since we landed.
Instead,
She kept
he
checking
looked
her
like the
phone
kind of
and then
man
turned
who
her
remembers
face down.
birthdays.
She skipped the second
and
round of
asked
drinks at
nurses
dinner,
polite questions,
which for her wasn't unusual.
and still had access
But
to
she
parts
also
of this
stopped
family
listening in the
Mara
middle
had
of a
lost.
client story.
June
and
stared out the
when she
restaurant
saw him.
window so long,
Our
Carol
VP
started
had to
crying
repeat
with
her
relief.
name twice.
When
Mara
Seth
went
made
very
some harmless
still.
joke about
Nobody
whoever's
had to
waiting at
tell me
home
who he was.
putting up with her schedule.
Sam saw me
Mara
a second
smiled
later.
without her eyes and changed
His
the
eyes
subject
moved
from
so
Mara
cleanly
to me.
It made the whole table
to Carol,
uncomfortable.
still clutching my sleeve.
I noticed because I always
And the whole
noticed her
room
more than I
changed
should have.
temperature. That was my own
I
problem.
stood up because it seemed
I was
like the adult
35,
thing to do.
old enough to know better than
This
to
is
get
Eli,
attached to people who
June
sign my
said too
performance
quickly.
reviews.
Sam's expression
Old enough to
barely
know
shifted.
admiration can put on
Right.
cleaner clothes
Not
and start
right.
calling itself
Nothing
something
about
else.
it was right.
I had a whole
He
graveyard
handed
of
June the
bad
bag
timing
and walked
behind
over
me
to
already.
Carol first,
An engagement
crouching
that
beside
ended
her
with 2
chair,
mugs breaking
speaking
gently.
gently. Familiar.
A mother I kept thinking
Easy.
I had one more
The
phone
kind of
call
ease
with.
that only
a habit
comes
of
from
showing
having
up
been
late
led
to
inside
the
a
most
family
important
for years.
emotional moments of my
Mara
own
watched
life.
him with this
Then spending
unreadable
years
face
trying
that
to
made
make
me
up for them in
instantly,
situations
irrationally
that didn't belong
angry.
to me.
So
Not
when
at
Mara
him,
asked me to
at
be
how
her husband
stupid I
for one
suddenly
night,
felt.
the smart part
I
of me
drifted out
understood
to the
exactly
exactly how
under the
dangerous
excuse
that
of finding
sentence
coffee.
was.
The other
truth
part had
was, I
already
needed
grabbed
my
walls
car
that weren't
keys.
crowded with history.
We were in the
I didn't
elevator
belong
less
to.
than 5 minutes later.
Halfway to the vending
She
machines,
changed out of the
June
black
caught up
heels
with
and
me.
into white hotel
"Hey,"
slippers that
she
made
said.
her look strangely
I
younger.
turned. Almost
You didn't mention
unfinished.
he'd be here. She hugged her elbows
mouth
while we
tightened.
dropped 12 floors
I
in
didn't call him.
silence.
Where
Your
are we
mom
going?
looked pretty
I
relieved to
asked.
see him.
Akron General.
My mom
she
would be
said.
relieved if Elvis
You grew
walked
up
in
in
with
Akron?
a casserole right now.
Close enough. I almost
The
smiled.
elevator doors opened into the
Almost.
lobby.
Rain
leaned
smeared
against
the
the
glass
wall
and
and
folded
folded
her arms.
The valet looked half
Sam
asleep.
still helps sometimes.
Mara stopped
After the
walking
divorce,
long
he
enough to
stayed
tuck a
close to my
strand of damp
parents.
hair behind her ear.
Dad had knee surgery
Then said
last year,
very
and Sam
quietly,
drove him to physical therapy.
"You can still
because
say
Mara
no.
was in Denver and I had
I
the
should have.
kids.
That's the truth."
That hit me in a place
Instead,
I
I
didn't have a
said,
defense
"Do I
for.
get a fake name, or
So
am I
I'm
just
what,
me with worse
exactly?
judgment?"
I asked.
She
Back
looked
up?
at me then, and for the
June
first
looked
time
tired
that
enough to
night,
tell the
something
truth.
loosened in her face.
No.
"You're
the
the fake
person she
husband,"
called
she
first.
said.
You're not very
I
reassuring.
laughed once, low.
That's not my department.
That doesn't make it better.
The smallest sound came out of
It
her.
should.
Not quite a
I
laugh.
didn't answer.
More
June
like a
studied
crack
me
in the
for a
wall
second.
where one could happen later.
"You don't know much about her, do you?"
Outside, the cold hit us
"I know
at
enough."
once. I ran to
"No,"
get the car
she
and
said
brought
gently.
it around while she waited.
"You know
under
the version of
awning,
her that
hugging
answers
herself.
emails."
When she slid
She
into
looked
the
back toward
passenger
the waiting
seat,
room
she
before
smelled like
continuing.
rain. Hotel
"They lost a
soap,
baby 2 years
and the
ago.
citrus perfume
Mara
she
and
wore so
Sam.
lightly I only ever
Halfway
caught
through
it
the
when she
pregnancy.
passed too close.
Everything after
I
that
pulled
went
out
bad
onto
in
the
slow
road.
motion.
Wipers
He
thumped
grieved
back
by
and
staying
forth.
close to people.
Downtown lights
She
blurred
grieved by
gold in the
disappearing into
windshield.
work and acting like she
For the
could
first
still
10
outrun
minutes,
herself.
neither of us said much.
My parents loved them
Then,
together
somewhere near
because
the
they could
highway, she
understand that
asked,
version of her.
"Are you
Married,
angry?"
Stable.
At what?
Smiling in Christmas
That I
photos.
asked.
I
When
kept
it
my
ended,
eyes on the road.
they acted like if they just
I haven't
kept
figured
loving
it out
Sam
yet.
loudly enough,
That got a real
maybe
laugh.
the divorce would reverse itself.
Brief, tired.
I stared at the
gone too
vending
fast.
machine glass. Chips,
My mother has memory
gum,
issues.
reflection
she
of
said
a
after
man in a
while.
wrinkled dress shirt,
Nothing formal
realizing
enough
he
to
had
make it
walked into a
easier.
room
Just
already full of ghosts.
Some days she loses the
She
order
didn't
of
tell me
things.
any of that. Since
said.
chemo last year, stress
June's
makes it
voice
worse.
softened.
She
She
keeps
probably
reaching
thought
for
if she
old
did,
versions
you'd
of
see
people
how much
because
it
they're
still
easier
hurts.
to hold on to. That should have made
I
me go
nodded.
back in there kinder than
She
before.
still thinks I'm married sometimes.
Instead, I went
Mara
back
went
raw.
on.
Usually
In
I
the doorway,
correct
I
her.
saw
Mara and Sam
Tonight, my
standing
sister
near
said
the
she's
nurse's
scared
station,
and asking
talking
for me.
low. And if I
He
walk in
handed
there
her a cup
alone,
of
I'm going to have
coffee.
to watch her understand
She said
all
something
over
I couldn't
again
hear.
that my marriage ended.
He touched her
My
elbow
father
just
is in
briefly,
surgery, and
she
her
didn't
body
move
keeps
away.
forgetting how to protect her.
Jealousy
from bad
is an
news.
ugly thing when it catches you
Her
by
fingers
surprise.
twisted together in her lap.
Mine came with embarrassment.
I know how
attached.
selfish that sounds.
I told myself I was reacting.
It doesn't
because
sound
the whole
selfish.
situation was absurd.
It sounds
because I had
pathetic
been
then.
dragged into the emotional
No.
debris field of a
I
marriage
glanced at
that
her.
clearly still had.
It sounds like you
fingerprints
don't want
all
your mother
over it.
breaking twice in one
Because
night.
she'd asked me to stand in for
She
something.
turned toward the
maybe
window
wasn't
after
finished
that.
mourning.
Not because she
But
was
the
done
truth
talking.
was simpler.
More because
and meaner.
sometimes when someone
I
gets
wanted
too
to be the
close to
person she
truth,
looked for when
you
she
need
was
glass
falling
between
apart.
you and their face.
Realizing somebody
We
else
drove
had been
another
that person
15 minutes
first
through rain
can
and
make a
truck
grown
spray
man feel
and
about
dark
15.
stretches of road lined with
I spent
wet
the next
trees.
half hour being quieter.
At one
than
red light,
necessary. Her phone lit up with a name I didn't
wrong,
know.
formal ways.
She silenced it without
Fetching
reading the
water.
message. Moving chairs.
Your sister?
Not
I
looking
asked.
at her too long.
She hesitated.
Mara noticed,
No.
of course. She
That was
noticed
all she
everything.
said.
Around
At a gas
2:30,
station
she found
outside
me
the
by the
hospital
vending
district.
machines.
I stopped
Staring
to
at
fill
a
up because
rotating
the
row
tank
of
was
stale
lower than I
granola
thought.
bars like they had answers.
Mara stayed in the car at first.
You're angry now.
Head tipped
she
back
said.
against the seat.
I kept my eyes
on
closed.
the machine.
Under
You've
the
got a
hard
lot going
fluorescent
on.
canopy, she
We
looked
can
suddenly
skip the
less
emotional
like my boss,
diagnostics.
and more like a woman who
folded
had been
her
holding
arms.
herself together
That
with
means
posture
yes.
alone.
I
I
finally
bought
looked at
coffee
her.
neither of us wanted.
Your ex-husband
A bottle
seems
of
very
water.
capable.
I'm
And
not
one
sure
of those
why
little
you
packets
needed
of
me.
peanut butter crackers
For a
people
second,
only eat in
hurt
emergencies
crossed her
or
face so
childhoods.
fast I almost missed
When
it.
I got back,
Then the
she
shutters
blinked
came
at the
down.
crackers like they had
Right,
personally
she said
insulted
quietly.
her.
You think this
That's
is
what you
comfort
think this
food?
is?
I
What
think
am I
it's
supposed to
11:30, and you haven't
That I
eaten
asked the
since
wrong
lunch.
person, apparently.
She took them
She turned
anyway.
before I could stop
Our
her and
fingers
walked
brushed
away.
for a second.
Not
warm
dramatic,
and dry
just
despite the
done.
cold.
The kind of walking
It was such
away
a
that
small
makes you
thing,
understand you have managed
But she
to
looked
fail
at someone
me,
in a
and I
very
looked
specific
back.
way.
And something in
I
that
stood there
pause
with my
felt
own
more
bitterness
intimate
cooling
than it had
into
any
shame.
right to. At 3 in the morning,
Thank you,
hospitals
she said.
get even more honest.
I shrugged like it didn't
Families
matter.
stop performing.
It mattered.
Makeup gives
Of
up.
course it did.
People cry in stairwells
At the
and
hospital,
come back
everything
pretending
turned that
allergies.
awful shade
Machines
of
keep
overnight.
beeping because
Too
bodies
bright in
don't
the
care what
ceilings,
time it is.
Too tired in the
I
chairs.
found Mara in a
too
small
honest on
alcove near the
people's
vending
faces.
room, sitting with
The vending
one knee
machine
pulled
buzzed
up,
by the waiting
untouched
area.
coffee cooling
The
in her
coffee
hands.
smelled burnt enough
The
to
overhead
peel
light
paint.
was too harsh. Somewhere
It
down
made
the
the
corridor,
exhaustion
a
under
baby cried once and stopped. Can I sit?
Mara slowed
I asked.
before we reached the
She
family
didn't
waiting
answer for
room.
a second.
You don't
Then
have
she
to
moved
say
her
much,
bag off the
she
chair
said.
beside her.
If my mother
I
asks,
sat. Just be kind.
The silence between
My
us
sister
wasn't
knows
friendly,
the truth.
but it wasn't
She won't
empty
make this
either.
worse.
Rain tapped
your
the high
father?
window. She
Somewhere
gave me a
nearby,
look that
a
should have
nurse
answered the
laughed
question,
softly at something
but
I
didn't.
couldn't hear.
My father doesn't really
sorry,
make room for
I
truths
said.
he didn't approve of.
Mara stared at the
That was the
coffee
first
cup.
moment I understood
which
I wasn't
part?
walking into a simple lie.
For making tonight about
I was
me for
walking
even
into a
5
house
minutes.
fire with a paper cup of water.
She rubbed her thumb over the
June
paper
recognized
lid.
Mara before we
That's
got
not
all the way
exactly
into the
what you
room.
did. She stood up so
felt
fast
close
her
enough.
blanket slid off her knees.
Another silence.
She was younger,
Then she said,
softer around the
I didn't
edges.
call Sam,
but I could see the family resemblance in the eyes.
June had probably
the same
told her we
careful way
talked.
of looking at people.
Mara
like they
exhaled
might
slowly.
bruise if handled wrong.
I asked you because
Mare,
Sam knows how to
she
look
breathed.
right in rooms like this.
They hugged hard,
and I couldn't
not
survive
graceful,
being looked at
real.
correctly tonight.
Then June looked
I
over
asked you
Mara's
because
shoulder
you
at
listen
me,
when people
took in
are
my
ugly with
face,
grief.
the awkward distance
You don't
I was
rush in to
keeping,
tidy it.
and understood everything in
That
about
landed
2
harder
seconds.
than I was ready for.
This is Eli,
She
Mara
kept going,
said,
voice
and
low.
there was the tiniest break in her
because
voice
my
before
mother
she
likes
added,
you.
He came
I
with
blinked.
me. June
Your
held
mother's
my
met me
gaze for
once.
half a beat.
She asked about
Then
you
she
for
walked
2
over
weeks
and
after
hugged
the
me
Christmas
too.
party.
Said
Thank
you had kind eyes.
She whispered into my shoulder.
Mara gave the
That
tiniest,
did something to my
saddest
chest I wasn't
smile.
prepared for.
She's
Their mother
better at
was
reading
sitting by the
people than I
far
am
wall
when
with
she's
a
not
cardigan
scared.
wrapped around her like
I
it was a
leaned back
coat.
and looked at the floor.
Small woman, thin
You could have told
wrists.
me about Sam.
The kind of tired elegance.
I could have told
some
you a
mothers
lot of
keep,
things.
even in hospital
The
waiting
way she said
rooms.
it made me glance
She
up.
looked up when Mara
She was
approached,
looking at me
and
now,
for a second,
really looking.
the fear in her
no
face
boss
was so
face,
naked
no
I had
careful
to look away.
distance.
Just
Then
a
she saw
tired
me.
woman in a wrinkled
Oh,
black dress,
she said,
hair slipping
and relief
loose,
softened her
eyes
entire
full
body.
of everything she usually
There
kept
you are.
behind locked doors.
Mara knelt in front of her.
My mother died in a
Mom.
hospital. Carol
I said
touched her
before I
daughter's
could
cheek,
reconsider.
then reached for
3
my
years
hand
ago.
without really asking.
I left in the afternoon
Her palm
because
was
a client
cruel,
threatened to pull an
fragile
account,
and I
almost.
thought I had time.
I let her hold on.
She was lucid when I left.
I told June you wouldn't
By
come
the time
alone.
I got back,
she
she
said to
wasn't.
Mara.
I said
Mara
your
didn't
husband would
speak.
bring you. I
Mara's
laughed
eyes
once, but
flickered
there wasn't
shut.
anything funny
Just
in
once.
it.
I've spent a lot of time
Yeah,
since then
she
pretending
said
that if I
quietly.
become the kind
You
of
did.
person who always shows
Nobody
up,
in that room
it might
breathed
undo
for a
that
second.
one time I didn't.
I said something then.
Her face changed
I don't
then,
even remember
softened
what.
in a way that almost
Probably
undid
hello.
me.
Probably
That's
something
why you
gentle
came,
and useless.
she said.
But Carol
Partly.
smiled at me like I was
What's
a
the
piece
other
of
part?
furniture returning to a
I should have
familiar
lied,
corner.
said obligation,
And I understood
said
what old
decency,
memory can do.
said
when
you
it's
looked
scared.
terrified and I had a car.
It doesn't check facts.
Instead, I looked at her and
It
told the
reaches.
truth in the smallest way I
An
could
hour
manage.
later, around 1 in the morning,
You asked.
I met the
She
man
looked away
Mara had
first.
silenced on her
That
phone.
detail stayed with me because
His name
Mara
was
almost
Sam.
never looked away first.
He came in carrying
She let out a breath
rain-soaked
that
coat
sounded like it hurt.
and a paper bag from a
For someone who
24-hour
claims
diner.
not to be reassuring,
He was
she
tall,
said, "You're
tired
annoyingly
looking,
good at making me
decent
feel
face,
less alone."
not slick.
I smiled
not
despite
a villain.
myself. For someone who
almost would have been
terrorizes
easier.
spreadsheets, you cry with
Instead, he looked like
surprisingly
the
good
kind of
posture.
man who remembered birthdays.
She laughed then
and asked
actually
nurses
laughed.
polite questions.
A wet,
and
tired,
still had
startled
access
sound
to
that
parts
broke
of his
halfway
family
through
Mara
because she
had
was too
lost.
close to crying again.
June
She
stood
covered
up
her
when she
mouth,
saw him.
shook her head, and
Carol
I handed her
started
the
crying
cheap
with
hospital
relief.
napkin from my pocket.
Mara went very
Our
still.
fingers touched.
Nobody
Neither
had
of us
to tell
moved
me
right
who he
away.
was. It wasn't dramatic.
Sam saw me a second
No
later.
music swelled in the background.
His eyes moved from
no
Mara
lightning to me.
just skin against
Carol
skin
still
in an
clutching
ugly
my
little
sleeve.
hospital alcove at
And the
3
whole
in the
room
morning.
changed
And
temperature.
both of us very still.
I stood up
like the
because
wrong
it seemed
movement
like the
would tell
adult
the
truth
thing to
too
do.
clearly.
This
Then
is
her
Eli,
phone rang. June said.
Reality
too quickly.
always has
Sam's
terrible
expression
timing.
barely shifted.
It was June.
Right.
Their father was awake
Not
and
right.
agitated.
Nothing about it was
When
right.
we got to recovery, the nurse
He handed
looked
June the
relieved to see
bag and walked
family.
over to Carol
Frank
first.
Bennett was pale
crouching
and
beside
groggy
her chair,
and angry in the
speaking
way some
gently.
frightened men become
Familiar,
because anger
easy,
feels sturdier than
the kind
fear.
of ease that only comes
He
from
saw
having
Mara
been led
first
inside
and
a
immediately
family
tried
for
to sit
years.
up against the nurse's
Mara watched
instructions.
him with this unreadable
"Where have you
face that
been?"
made me
he asked.
instantly,
Driving
irrationally
here,
angry.
Mara said, stepping
Not
close.
at him,
At
He
how
ignored
stupid
that.
I suddenly felt.
His eyes moved to Sam.
I drifted out to
then
the
me,
hallway under the excuse
confusion
of finding
tightening his
coffee.
face.
The truth
What is
was,
this?
I needed walls that weren't
Nobody
crowded
answered
with history
fast
I
enough.
didn't belong to.
Mara froze.
Halfway
I could
to
feel
the
it
vending
happen
machines,
beside me.
June caught up
Years
with
of
me.
old family weather
"Hey,"
passing
she
through her
said.
spine all at
I
once.
turned.
Frank
"You didn't
looked
mention
at
he'd
Sam
be
again.
here."
I
Her
thought,
mouth tightened.
Dad,
I didn't
June
call him.
cut in. But he
Your
was
mom
already
looked
pushing
pretty
on,
relieved to see
weak
him.
and blunt and freshly
My
dragged
mom would
from
be relieved
anesthesia.
if Elvis walked in with a
You always
casserole
make everything
right now.
harder than it needs to be,
I
Mara.
almost smiled.
I saw her face
Almost.
close from the inside.
June leaned against
Maybe
the
that
wall and
sentence
folded
sounds
her
small
arms.
on paper.
Sam
wasn't
still
small
helps
in that
sometimes.
room.
After
It
the
had
divorce,
history in
he
it.
stayed close to my
Years
parents.
of being the difficult one.
Dad had knee
The
surgery
ambitious
last
one.
year, and Sam
The
drove
daughter
him to
who made
physical
grief
therapy because
inconvenient
Mara
by
was
surviving
surviving
it
it badly.
badly. The kids.
Before I thought better of
That
it,
hit
I
me in
stepped
a
closer
place
to
I
the
didn't have a
bed.
defense
defense for? Hey, I said,
So I'm
keeping
what?
my voice
Exactly,
calm. I asked. She got here in the
Back
middle
up?
of the night. She's been here
June
for
looked
hours.
tired enough to tell the truth.
You don't have to figure out every
No,
relationship in the
you're
room
the person
before you
she
say
called
thank you.
first.
Silence.
I laughed once.
Not
Low.
heroic silence.
That doesn't
Horrified
make it better.
silence.
It
Sam
should.
looked at me like I just
I didn't
kicked a
answer.
church door open.
June studied me for
June
a second.
stared. The
You
nurse
don't know much
suddenly
about
found
her,
her
do you?
clipboard fascinating.
I know
Mara's
enough. Father survived the worst of the night,
she said gently.
but the hospital
You
left
know the version
everyone
of her that
changed.
answers emails.
Frank, still weak
She looked
and
back toward the
confused,
waiting room before
looked at Mara's
continuing.
exhausted face.
They lost a
and
baby 2
quietly
years
told
ago.
her to sit down.
Mara and Sam.
The closest thing he had
halfway
ever
through the
offered
pregnancy.
to tenderness.
Everything
Nearby,
after that went
Carol
bad in
admitted
slow
that grief
motion.
sometimes made her
He
mistake
grieved by
kindness
staying
for
close to
someone she had
people.
lost long ago.
She grieved by disappearing
and told
into
Eli
work
something
and acting
he
like
would
she
never
could still
forget.
outrun herself.
She chose you anyway.
My parents loved them together because
On the
they
drive
could
back,
understand that
Mara
version
and
of her,
Eli shared
married,
a silence
stable,
that no longer felt
smiling
angry.
in Christmas photos.
At the hotel door,
When it ended,
she
they
admitted
acted
she had
like
never
if they just
pretended
kept
about
loving
feeling
Sam
safe
loudly
with him.
enough.
Maybe
life
life
didn't
didn't
reward
reward
honesty
itself.
immediately.
I stared at
Back
the
in
vending
Chicago,
machine glass.
Mara became
Chips,
distant
gum,
and professional.
reflection
hiding
of a
behind
man in a
work
wrinkled
while
dress
Eli
shirt,
buried
realizing
himself
he had
in
walked
sleep
into
into
a
nights
room
and
already
unanswered
full of
feelings.
ghosts.
Every
She didn't tell me any of
felt
that,
careful.
I said.
Every moment
June's
carried
voice
words
softened.
left unsaid.
She probably thought if she
Weeks
did,
later,
you'd see
Mara
how much it still
revealed she was
hurts.
transferring to another office.
That should have made me go back
The
in there
announcement
kinder
finally
than
broke the
before.
wall between them.
Instead,
She admitted the
I went
truth
back
she had been
raw.
avoiding all along.
From the doorway,
She
I
borrowed
saw
one
Mara
night
and
of
Sam
closeness
standing
because
near
she
the
was
nurse's
terrified
station,
of how
talking
deeply she
low.
wanted someone to
He
stay.
handed her a cup of coffee.
Eli answered simply.
She said something I couldn't hear.
I would have stayed.
He touched her
They never
elbow
kissed.
just briefly.
They only
and she
stood
didn't
close
move
enough
away.
for almost.
Jealousy is an ugly
Sometimes
thing
almost
when it
means
catches you
more.
by surprise.
Later, Mara
Mine
invited
came
him
with
to dinner with
embarrassment
her family.
attached.
When
I
he
told
arrived,
myself
she
I was
opened the door
reacting
without
because
distance,
the whole situation
without
was
masks,
absurd. Because
just
I had been
honesty.
dragged into the emotional
And Eli
debris field
realized
of
the
a
hardest
marriage
night
that
of his
clearly
life
wasn't
wasn't
pretending to be
fingerprints
someone
all
else.
over it. It was
Because
learning
she'd
that
asked
love
me to
begins
stand
when
in for
people
something
stop
she
pretending
maybe
at
wasn't
all.
finished mourning. But the truth was simpler and meaner. I wanted to be the person she